Okay, so this is the fifth part in my video series about my experience in Canada between summer 2019 to spring 2020. And in the last video, I talked about my experience getting dismissed from the Amsterdam brew house. And I was going to continue that with the next video in the series where I discuss the next job that I got, where I moved a couple 100 miles up north. But before I touch on that, there were some other memorable occasions and experiences I had while I was living in Toronto, and I thought I'd talk about those a little bit here in this video. So in the 3 months that I spent staying in Toronto, I got a fairly good feel of the city. As I mentioned before, it was a very exciting and fun place to be, certainly in the short term, although in the long term, it basically costs money to breathe oxygen over there. And I think the same can be said of basically any big city. You know, the idea is you can't live in a big city in the long term because it's too exciting, there's too much going on, and everything costs money. And that's what makes it an exciting place to be. Now, on the topic of exciting things to do and exciting things to see, what memorable moments, what memorable occasions can I look back on in the 3 months that I spent there? Well, one memory I often have is, you know how in every major city, there's a thoroughfare, or is it there's a central hub of commerce and activity, and where there are crowds of people at any given time, which are, and the places are iconic and memorable enough where they conceptualize the burgeoning, sprawling urban activity of the city in a single image. Now, forgive me for that word salad, but what I mean to say by this is every major city has a sort of central hub where all the people go for a good time, and all the people need to go and see to catch a real glimpse of the true heart of the city. So in London, for instance, what is there? There's Piccadilly Circus. I got to confess, I've never actually been to Piccadilly Circus. But if you go on Google Images and type in Piccadilly Circus, you'll probably have already seen it without being aware of it. The whole place is emblazoned with LED screens and billboards, advertisements, exciting, fun shops. Come to think of it, I don't even think Piccadilly Circus is the only main thoroughfare in London. What else is there? Leicester Square, Oxford Street. In New York, similarly, there's Times Square. And even if you haven't been to New York, you've probably seen Times Square, or a city, or an image of a city that looks a lot like it. Because Times Square is basically, it's sort of, it's like the epicenter of commercial activity and tourism, where all the people who want to spend money go to. In a lot of movies, for instance, when they show people wandering around New York, typically you might see them in an area that's similar to Times Square. And then in Tokyo, in Japan, and we actually went there once, there's Shibuya Crossing. It's a big it's a big crossing surrounded by really tall buildings. Again, there's LED billboards, there's all kinds of exciting shops, and there's so many people there at any given time. It's like the beating heart of Tokyo. Anyway, if I had time to write a script, I probably could have given a much more thorough description of the phenomenon which I'm describing. But anyway, there's a vibrant beating heart of every city. So what is Toronto's? Well, Toronto's, I think, is Dundas Square. Basically, there's an intersection that's surrounded by really tall buildings, again with billboards and LED screens, and there's a mall there, and I forget if it's called Dundas Square or Eaton Square, but that's basically where all the cool shops and all the cool things to do are in Toronto. And I had so much fun going in there, even though a lot of the time I didn't have the money, I didn't have the budget to go shopping around there most of the time. It was just fun going in there doing a bit of window shopping. And one particular memory I have, which I'm fond of, in Dundas Square, is at the base floor, on the basement, there's all these delicious restaurants. There's a food court. I think there's a whole bunch of food courts serving all kinds of different exotic foods from all different parts of the world. And there was one place in particular that served waffles and ice cream. And sadly, I can't remember it. But if you happen to know what it is, and if it's still there, if it hasn't been shut down since the pandemic, then you probably know the place I'm talking about. God, I had so much fun going there. Even now, just looking back and thinking about all those waffles and or was it pancakes? Yeah, I think I had pancakes as well. Or did I have waffles and then pancakes? God, I can't remember. I spoiled myself rotten while I was walking around there in the Dundas Center, the Dundas Square. No, wait, what's the name of the mall? I think it's the Eaton Center. Yeah, as in it's spelled Eaton, and it's pronounced the same way as Eton College, you know, where all the prime ministers of Great Britain go to be educated. And it sounds a lot like Eton, which, funnily enough, is what I spent a lot of my time doing in there. Eating delicious ice cream and delicious food. So I went there a couple of times. Some other thoughts I had, some other thoughts that occurred to me while I was walking, and this was especially when I was walking down Spadina Avenue. Spadina Avenue, I think, is one of the main sort of avenues that cuts through Toronto. There's a bunch, but Spadina Avenue is the one that was the closest to the place where I spent all my time in the hostel and at the lodgings where I was living. And I remember walking down thinking, wow, how many Chinese food shops do there need to be here? There does not need to be this many Chinese food shops. I'm aware that Toronto, even back then, had a very large, sprawling Chinese immigrant community living there. Yeah, there was a Chinatown in Toronto, as well as there being a Little Italy and a Greek town, etc., etc. But it's like, didn't the Chinese ever fancy eating something different? I mean, isn't it enough to have just one or two? Why do there need to be 5,000 or 6,000? I swear, there are more Chinese food shops in Toronto, especially in Spadina Avenue, than there are grains of sand in the beach. So that's another thing I look back on. Another thing I remember is whenever I was going to work, I would always take the streetcar. yeah, what I would do is I'd take the streetcar from Spadina Avenue, the stop that's at Spadina Avenue, and I'd typically get off at Queens Quay. Was it Queens Quay East or Queens Quay West? It's at the end of it's at the harbour front, where you can where overlooking Lake Ontario, where the islands are. And if you walk further down the street, I think if you walk further, anyway, if you walk down in a certain direction, then you'll come across the restaurant where I worked, which unfortunately hasn't closed down because of the pandemic and is still there for some reason. And before my shift at work would start, because I'm not really that much of a great cook, and I'm too lazy to cook anyway, and I like to go out and eat delicious food and try new things. And what actually, no, if I'm being honest, I don't really like to try new things. What I really like to do is I tend to stick with the same food each time. And there was a Subway, a fairly short walk, I think a fairly short walk away from the streetcar stop on Spadina Avenue. There was a Subway there, and I would treat myself to a footlong. It was usually a footlong because I've got a big appetite. If you guys haven't seen what I look like, I'm very tall, and it's surprising that all the calories that I've accumulated over the years haven't gone to my stomach. But anyway, no, I always needed to eat a big sandwich, typically with a Coke and some cookies. Although, if I was in a more disciplined mood, I'd just have the big sandwich and nothing else. Oh yeah, and that reminds me. Actually, they had free Coke at the place where I worked. Or they call it pop over there. Yeah, another interesting difference between across the pond for the Atlantics. They call what they call pop over there is what we basically call fizzy drinks. You know, carbonated drinks like Coca-Cola. And they had a pop machine where you could basically go out back and pour yourself a drink. That was one of the perks I remember. Of course, it was a small consolation to the drudgery of having to do the same monotonous, repetitive tasks day in, day out. Bus food over to tables with customers who you'd never get to speak with, whose service you'd never get to see them appreciate. But in a city where everything is as wildly expensive, like Toronto, having free Coke wasn't too bad. So anyway, those are some of the memories that I have in the few months that I spent living in the city.